Okay, let's get right into it. We're not just talking about any old rock band here. We are talking about Aerosmith, a band that didn't just survive for 5 decades. No, they completely imploded, vanished, and then somehow clawed their way back to become even bigger than before. This is basically a masterclass in resilience, a story that just completely defies all industry logic. And it all kind of boils down to this one bizarre, almost unbelievable quote from Steven Tyler himself. "We split up over a glass of spilt milk." I mean, seriously. How does a rock and roll empire just crumble over something so trivial? That one sentence, though, it perfectly captures the chaos, the ego, and all the drama that brought them to their knees. And that right there, that's the central mystery we're going to unpack. See, their story isn't just one rise to the top. It's two. It's a collapse so total it really should have been the end, followed by a comeback so massive it rewrote the rules for the entire music industry. So the big question is, how on earth did they do it? To really understand the comeback, you first have to understand the original machine. So let's rewind. We're going all the way back to the beginning, to the gritty Boston scene where that iconic Aerosmith sound was first forged. You see, Aerosmith wasn't just one sound. It was this incredible collision of two different worlds. On one hand, you had Steven Tyler's pop rock sensibilities coming from New York. And on the other, you had the raw, free-form, bluesy energy of Joe Perry and Tom Hamilton from New Hampshire. That fusion, that's what created the signature Aerosmith swagger. And they hammered out that sound right here in a tiny Boston apartment. I mean, picture this. They're all living on top of each other, completely broke, watching Three Stooges reruns and just jamming relentlessly. This wasn't some band put together by a record label. This was a gang. And that intense, high-pressure environment is what created the streetwise charisma that really set them apart. And from there, man, their rise was just meteoric. They go from playing a high school gym in 1970 to being crowned America's greatest rock and roll band by 1976. Albums like Toys in the Attic and Rocks weren't just hit records, they were cultural landmarks that basically defined the sound of American hard rock for an entire generation. But here's the paradox, right? The very success they worked so hard for, it had the seeds of its own destruction baked right in. This was the era of the Toxic Twins, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry, and it led to a complete and total collapse. So how did it go so wrong? Well, for starters, their creative process just fell apart. In the early days, their genius came from jamming together, this shared intuition they had. But by the late 70s, they were isolated in a former convent, fueled by drugs, and barely even talking to each other. The creative engine had completely seized up. And then there was the money, which was a total disaster. I mean, can you imagine being the lead guitarist of one of the biggest bands in the world and being handed a bill for $80,000 just for room service? This wasn't just about partying. It showed a complete lack of control and trust that was poisoning everything. Which brings us right back to the spilled milk. It's July 28th, 1979. A backstage fight between Joe Perry's wife and Tom Hamilton's wife gets out of hand. Milk is thrown, insults are hurled between Tyler and Perry, and that's it. That's the final straw. Joe Perry quits on the spot. All that tension just finally boiled over. And after that, the fallout was swift and brutal. First Perry leaves, then the other guitarist, Brad Whitford, is gone a year later. They bring in replacements, but the magic, that signature two-guitar attack, it's just gone. Their next album, Rock in a Hard Place, is a total commercial flop. For all intents and purposes, Aerosmith was finished. Done. But then, just when you think it's all over, the impossible happens. The comeback is engineered by two incredibly bold moves. One focused on getting their lives together, the other on musical innovation. And this becomes the blueprint for their rebirth. First up, Rehab. Their new manager, Tim Cullens, did not mess around. He staged an intervention, got the entire band and their road crew clean, and enforced a strict zero-tolerance policy. This wasn't just about saving their career. This was about literally saving their lives. Okay, so they're clean. Now what? Well, then came this absolute stroke of creative genius. The producer, Rick Rubin, pairs them up with Run DMC to remake Walk This Way. And the result? The new version actually charts higher than the original. This wasn't just a hit song, this was revolutionary. It broke down genre walls and introduced a sober Aerosmith to the whole MTV generation. So now you have a sober band with a brand new, younger audience. And what followed wasn't just a comeback, it was a second reign. one that would somehow become even bigger than their 70s peak and turn them into true global icons. So here's where they got really smart. Their whole strategy shifted. They started collaborating with professional hitmakers like Desmond Child and Diane Warren. Now, this was kind of controversial for some of the old school fans, but you absolutely cannot argue with the results. It led to this string of polished, massive hits, perfectly crafted for radio and stadiums, from Dude Looks Like a Lady all the way to Angel. I mean, their dominance in the 90s was just this all-out multimedia assault. You had these huge multi-platinum albums like Pump and Get a Grip. You had their cinematic MTV videos on constant rotation. They were doing these massive global tours. And then came the ultimate power ballad, I Don't Want to Miss a Thing, for the movie Armageddon, which became their first ever #1 hit. They were just inescapable. So, when you step back and look at this whole insane story, what's the big takeaway? Aerosmith's journey isn't just rock and roll history. It's this incredibly powerful model for resilience that honestly applies way beyond music. If you boil it all down, their longevity really rests on four main pillars. First, you have that core sonic identity, that unique swing that only the original lineup had. Second, their willingness to adapt and evolve their sound with new producers. Third, the managerial discipline from Tim Collins that literally forced them to get clean. And finally, an incredible cultural flexibility that let them pivot from rock to rap to power ballads, connecting with 3 different generations of fans. And that leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? Was their spectacular comeback some kind of strategic blueprint that other bands could follow? Or was it just a perfect storm? The right bands, the right manager, and the right song at the exact right moment. A true lightning in a bottle event that we will probably never see again.